It's my privilege to be able to talk to you on behalf of myself and the large team of people that are involved in the Angus Sire benchmarking program, and give you a bit of a taste of some of the early results of that program, and also give you some insight into the future of the program as well. The program's coordinator is Bob Dent, who is known, I'm sure, to most of you. Bob Dent is currently in New Zealand, giving some workshops over there and also talking about the program over there. So we're probably sharing some of the same slides. Hopefully when I walk away from here, is that working? Can you hear that? Is that still okay? I prefer not to be standing behind the mic if that's possible. I think it is. Turn you up the other way. Is that better? Can you hear me okay? Yep. So the objectives of the Sire benchmarking program, when it was initially set up 3 years ago, which remain the same now, is really to get some progeny test data on some elite Angus bulls, primarily Australian Angus bulls, but there are also New Zealand Angus bulls, bulls from the UK, and some bulls from the USA in there. So, but primarily to get progeny test data on our bulls so we can get better documentation on their genetic merit for things like feed efficiency, for carcass traits, particularly for those traits that are very difficult to measure and not likely to occur otherwise unless we had a program like this. We also needed more data so we can validate and to refine our breed plan, our genetic evaluation system, along the lines that was discussed in the last session, in fact. And thirdly, to develop a comprehensive database to enable us to be able to, in future, validate DNA markers. And in particular, again, for those difficult to measure traits like feed efficiency and carcass traits, meat quality traits. It's great to be able to use this, have this technology available using genomics, but it's only of any use to us if we've got the hard data to be able to correlate the variation in the DNA with the variation in performance. And for some of these traits that I mentioned, we don't have that data unless we actually work on it through a designed program like the Sire benchmarking program. We're very fortunate in Australia to have a federal government. Not many people congratulate the government these days, but I think we're very fortunate that we do have a government that does value innovation. And the reason we can conduct this program is that half the funding of the program comes from the federal government through an organisation called MLA Donor Company. It's federal government funds, it's not MLA levy funds. MLA administers the program, but half the funds come from the federal government to support innovation in the beef industry. So we're able to tap into those funding, into those funds. The other half of the funds come from Angus Australia. We have 5 cooperator herds involved in the program who do the joinings of cows that I'll talk about further. And we've had over 80 owners of bulls that have contributed sires into the program. We've had 120 sires into the program to date. We've had very valuable sponsorship from a number of organisations, but in particular Bayer Australia, who have supported us with the artificial breeding program using their fixed time AI program, and that's we've achieved exceptional results from that, and some of the information on your seats actually talk about some of those results from the fixed time AI. I won't be focusing on that, I'll be focusing more on the genetics results, but other than to say that we've been very pleased with the outcome of the use of fixed time AI in the program. And we've got partnerships with the University of New England at their Tolimba feedlot. I'll talk a bit more about that with a feedlot measurement of efficiency of these cattle, and with Ranges Valley feedlot who are finishing the cattle for us under their long-fed program and enabling us to collect carcass data on those animals when they're slaughtered. So that's a critical part of the whole equation. It's a lot of effort to breed these animals and to measure their growth, performance and feed efficiency, etc. But at the end of the day, we really do need to know how their carcasses hang up. You won't be able to read this very well, but I just want to give you an idea of the timeline. Initially, we designed the program for 3 joinings, what we call cohorts. It started in 2010 when we did the first joining, and those animals that were a result of that joining in 2010 are now steers that have gone through a feed efficiency test at Tolimba. At the feed efficiency facility. They're now at Ranges Valley. So here we are now in end of April 2013. The first steers are being finished. The first 90 in fact are due to be slaughtered in about mid-June. So we'll have the first slaughter information. We'll then do some analysis of meat quality on those animals as well. So certainly by the end of this year, we'll have had all of the data from that first cohort, and then of course we've got cohorts following. In 2011 we had another joining, 2012, late last year we had a third joining. Each year we've joined approximately 2,000 cows to generate about 1,000 calves, and that's varied a little bit from year to year depending on the bulls, the number of bulls we've used. And each of those bulls, each of the 40 bulls per year roughly are used across all of those 5 cooperator herds. Now the reason why we've done that is that that gives us a spread in the geographic spread in terms of the measurement of the performance of these animals, and it also drought proofs us a little bit in terms of the program. If we put all of our eggs in one basket, we could obviously have a disaster. There are the numbers over the 3 years. I won't go through the numbers individually, but just to note, I suppose, that we anticipated at least 50% conception through our fixed time AI. We got 57% the first year, 54% the second year, almost 59.7% last year. So that gives us good numbers of calves then to follow through. Our target was to generate on average about 25 calves per sire, and we've certainly achieved that and surpassed that. That's a bit of a summary of where we're up to. As I mentioned, cohort 1, we're getting close to the end. We've done the 600-day weights. I should have mentioned that the sisters of the steers that at Ranges Valley Feedlot have been joined back in the cooperator herd, so we're getting daughter fertility information on those, the first calf conception rate information that we've just now got, and of course those that then go through to calving will get calving information, calving difficulty in particular on those. And we'll have the first carcass information between June and September this year, and some meat quality assessments like the tenderness of the meat, for example. We'll have that sort of data by the end of the year. The second cohort, we're in the process now, we've done their 200-day weight. So over time this data has been accumulated and goes straight into our breed plan analysis to update breed plan as we go. Now this horrible graph here is something that you'll be able to download off the Angus website and look much more closely at your leisure. But essentially what I've shown here is the grey bars here for each of the 35 bulls in the first cohort. The grey bars were their estimated breeding values before the data from the Sire benchmarking program came in, and the dark bars are their EBVs afterwards. And the diamonds, the blue diamonds, were their accuracy of the EBV, so they're about 80% accuracy for this trait birth weight. And then once they get their data from the Sire benchmarking program, we've got accuracies now up around well above 90% for all of those bulls. So by having those sires represented in the program, straight away gives them much more accuracy of their EBVs. Some of the EBVs go up and some go down, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. If we look, for example, this bull here, we see that its estimated breeding value for birth weight, it was a bit over 4 and now it's above 6. You know, how is the program, what data from the program has actually caused that? So if we dig a little bit deeper and look at the progeny, the 27 calves with birth weights from this bull, and look at the contemporary group average, so the average of the contemporary group, so they're in lines for each of the contemporary groups, and look at the adjusted weight, the birth weight of those calves. The adjustment is just to adjust a little bit if they're out of maiden heifers versus older cows. But essentially this bull here, most of his birth weights were above contemporary group average. So anything above that line would mean that its actual its weight would have been higher than the average weight for the group it was in. So that sort of data across all of the traits is what's influencing the EBV. In some cases, an animal's individual weights might be below the contemporary group average, and if they're predominantly below, that will actually pull the EBV down. If they're above, it'll push the EBV up. So that's the sort of thing that's driving the EBVs, and it gives us a very good test, in fact, as to whether the EBVs are doing a very good job when we amalgamate that over a large number of animals. If we look at another one, here's a bull here that was a UK bull that we knew very little about. In fact, he didn't have any EBVs for birth weight, and the trial results would indicate that he's got a very high birth weight, up above 8. So, you know, what's the evidence from the trial that would drive that? Well, again, look at a similar sort of graph of the contemporary group averages for that bull was represented in, and the weights of his calves, and you can see that his calves were consistently well above. Not always, he's got some calves that were below average, but predominantly his calves were above average. And we're always going to see that variation, but that's how breed plan works, it's looking at what happens averaged across all of the calves. And that's on the basis of 23 calves. So straight away that bull we knew nothing about, we know that he's very likely to be a high birth weight bull. It's unlikely that his EBV will come back much more now when he gets more progeny. Look at another trait, 200 day weight, the same sort of thing. I won't dwell, 600 day weight. So all of these graphs are on the Angus website that can be accessed under the Sire benchmarking tab. So you can look at any of the traits, and as we get more data on each cohort, that information is loaded up on the website straight away. The bars across the bottom show what the variation is. So this one here is a bull that's EBV has gone up considerably, so it just simplifies it in terms of showing which ones have gone up and gone down. We've also got it for the carcass traits. So these steers and heifers were all scanned using ultrasound scanning technique. And if we look at P8 fat, for example, and look at an example of an animal here that's got a very high P8 fat, its EBV prior to having the data was, less than 1, and now it's up above 2. So it's an animal that's had the EBVs have gone up based on that scan information. What's the data look like? Again, the same sort of graph I showed you before, contemporary group average and the individual fat measures in this case, millimetres fat depth for the progeny. And we see that no wonder his EBV's gone up. All of his progeny, almost all of them, were well above contemporary group average for that trait P8 fat. So that's what's driving the EBVs. And in fact, that's what's driving the EBVs in your herds as well, exactly the same concept as comparing the performance of individuals against their contemporary group average. IMF percent, same thing. So we've got, and in fact, now these differences in the carcass traits are based on ultrasound scan. Now we're going to get a lot more powerful information on each of these carcass traits once we slaughter these animals and we get actual carcass data on them in terms of their eye muscle area, their fat depth, the intramuscular fat percent. And the way we get the intramuscular fat percent is we take a sample of the meat and take it to a laboratory and actually chemically work out how much fat is in that meat. So we do it very accurately. And that's the data that will then be fed into breed plan for these animals. So the carcass EBVs that are just based on scans I've got to limit. The accuracies will never get above about 80% based just on scanning, even if we had 1,000 scan records, because the correlation between scan and carcass is only about 0.8 in this case. When we get the real carcass data, we'll be able to get accuracies close to 100%. Cohort 2 bulls, even more bulls. So cohort 2 we had 47 bulls. Cohort 3 we had 40 bulls. So again, I'm not going to go through the details, but again to show you that we can line up all of the bulls and see how they've performed against one another based on the data from the Sire benchmarking program. So that just shows you how powerful, there's 200 day weight for those animals. That just shows you how powerful such a program can be in validating our breed plan information. Another way of looking at it is to see how much the EBVs have changed before and after. So again, sorry, I like to use graphs to show, so if you don't like graphs you're going to get a bit bored, but here's the original EBVs for birth weight, range between +1 up to +11, and here's the current EBV. So where the dot is where the animal, it's that animal there, for example, that blue dot, his original EBV was about +3 and he's now about +5.5, for example. And so we would expect in breed plan, if breed plan works properly and we get more data, the EBVs are going to change because their accuracies aren't 100%. They're typically only about 80%, 70 or 80%. EBVs will change with more data, but we'd expect there's just as much chance that they'll go up as go down, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. There's just as many bulls that they're, just as many sires across the two cohorts, cohort 1 and cohort 2. So there's almost 100 bulls represented there, and based on all of those, almost 2,000 progeny. And so there's just as many of the EBVs have gone up as gone down. So that gives us confidence that the birth weight EBVs in breed plan are doing a pretty good job at pinpointing what the merit is, what the genetic merit is, given the information available. And as we get more information available, we'd see all of those come closer to the middle line if they had higher accuracies. There's another trait, 200 day weight, the same story, and we've got that for all of the traits. Intramuscular fat percent. Does the EVVs for IMF% work? Well, but we haven't got as much of that data included in the analysis that I summarised here. There'll be more, in fact, available tomorrow after our breed plan run's just completed. But even with IMF% with the cohort 1 animals to date, it's working well. Just as many have gone up as gone down. I just want to now talk a little bit about the feed efficiency aspect of this project. And one of the really exciting parts of this project is that we've got the opportunity to measure the feed intake and then work out the feed conversion efficiency and the net feed intake and different measures of efficiency of those sires based on the performance of their steers in a feed efficiency test system. This system is the state-of-the-art system built in Canada from a company called GrowSafe. They've been around for about 30 years evolving and developing these systems, and we're certainly, myself and others that looked into it, believe that this was certainly the state-of-the-art system that we needed in Australia. So at the Talimba feedlot, which is just west of Armidale, we have an installation there of these GrowSafe feeders. They're in banks of eight feeders in a pen. And each of those 8 feeders can feed about 80 steers, or give or take 10 or 20. So the first 90 steers that went through Talimba from this program were put into 2 pens of 45, and then subsequent groups we've increased the density. The animals come in, these bins are on load cells, so continually scanning those cells, weighing the feed in the bin. So when an animal comes in using electronic identification, the system knows who the animal is and what the weight of the feed was that animal's consumed, and it does that 24 hours a day over a 70-day period. So we get very good measure of the feed intake and the differences in feed intake between those animals. And we also weigh them on a regular basis. In fact, this system has got some automatic weighing stations over the water points that we're not totally confident that it's giving us accurate enough weights yet, but in time that will be used. So we've actually weighed them on a weekly basis as well to track their growth performance. And if we can track their growth performance over time and their feed intake over time, we're able to then measure their conversion efficiency. If we think about the feed intake, what's happening to an animal when it takes its feed intake, some of it goes towards the maintenance and some of it goes towards weight gain. Unfortunately for humans, it seems to go more for weight gain than maintenance as you get older. But for cattle, a huge proportion of the feed is used for maintenance, and only a relatively small part is used for weight gain, as opposed to our competitors like chooks that have a digestive tract about as long as a ruler. You know, they've got a very high efficiency because they're very efficient at turning their high-cost feed into weight gain, whereas cattle are not so efficient, but they can use it. They can convert low-cost feed, of course. So how then do we use the data on feed efficiency, feed intake, sorry, to estimate differences in efficiency? Well, we've got measures of maintenance, for example, so the body weight that the animal's got to maintain through the feeding period will give us an indication of how much of the feed is going towards maintenance based on the body weight maintained. And the growth rate of the animal is giving us a good indication of how the growth rate is changing. And what we do is we use that data on the average body weight of the animal through the feed test period and its growth rate through the period, put that together to estimate a thing we call net feed intake, or the scientists call it residual feed intake, but it's net feed intake. So it's the feed intake net of differences in the body weight maintained and differences in growth rate between the animals. So with the data we've got from the Talimba system, we're able to rank the animals in terms of their feed intake, in terms of their growth rate, in terms of their net feed intake. And I just want to show you a few graphs to attempt to demonstrate that a little bit. Again, as I say, I like using graphs, and I'll try and explain. So across the bottom here, I've got the average. Each of these dots here represents a steer. There are 88 steers in the first batch that went through for cohort 1. They're in 2 different pens. Don't worry too much about the colours, but there's 88 steers here. This is their average trial weight, and this is their average daily feed intake. So we have a steer like G193. Here was one of the highest feed intake steers. Here was consuming on average over 19 kilos a day feed. Another steer down here was consuming only 14 kilos of feed a day. So big differences in feed intake between animals. But of course, this guy up here, he had a higher average trial weight, so he was heavier. So on average, he was heavier, and so a lot of his feed was going into maintaining his heavy body weight. This steer down here was average sort of a weight, but he was also very low feed intake. For an average weight, you'd expect he should have been up here. You should have, for an average weight, you should expect him to have an average feed intake. So we would expect this guy down here is probably more efficient. Well, we'll have a look at the data a bit deeper. So that's looking at the average weight of the animal during the trial. Same sort of graph with the feed intake, but across the bottom now I've got the weight gain. How much weight did they put on during the trial from the start of the trial to the end of the trial over that 70-day period? And the rankings change a little bit. You know, the heaviest animal heaviest animal might have been heavy at the start of the trial, he mightn't have been the faster growing animal. So again, but G193 he had a growth rate of about 2.2 kilos a day for his big appetite. Here's a bull out here. He had a weight gain of the same, but his feed intake was, you know, several kilos a day less. So again, you expect that G196 is probably a pretty efficient animal. So that's comparing weight gain with feed intake. Now we hear feedlotters talk about at times of feed conversion ratios. So if we work out the feed conversion ratio, how much weight gain did they put on per kilo of feed? The feed conversion ratio for this guy out here was 0.13. So he was putting on 0.13 of a kilo weight per kilo of feed intake, whereas this guy up here was only putting on 0.11. So he's got a superior feed conversion ratio if you just look at that ratio. But one of the problems with feed conversion ratio is we have an animal with the same feed conversion ratio, but this guy has got a high feed conversion ratio because he's a high growth rate animal with low feed intake. There's another one here that had the same feed conversion ratio. He was a more moderate feed intake animal with even lower feed intake. So the problem with feed conversion ratio is that potentially we can be selecting animals that don't eat much, but they mightn't grow. You know, they might also not have acceptable growth rate. So there are other measures, and another measure we've used, we'll certainly look at feed conversion ratio. Another measure we use is we compare their predicted feed intake for the group based on their average body weight and growth rate, their predicted feed intake, and compare that with their actual feed intake. And that's what we call net feed intake. We use a statistical procedure to work out their predicted feed intake. This animal up here though, for example, he's got a net feed intake of plus 2 kilos because we would have expected his expected feed intake, his predicted feed intake was about 17 kilos. Sorry, this animal up here, I'm sorry, we're looking at G155, how far he is from what his expected feed intake would have been down here. His actual feed intake was up here, so he had a positive net feed intake. He ate more, he ate 2 kilos a day more for his performance in terms of growth rate and weight gain, 2 kilos more than we'd expect based on the growth rate for that mob. There's another animal here, G149, he actually his predicted feed intake was about 17 kilos and his actual feed intake was down here only about 14 kilos. So he had a negative net feed intake of 1.6. So for net feed intake, negative is better. So we're able to measure them for that as well. And I'll slip through that one. So that's the sort of data that we can get, and we can put that data, we'll put that into breed plan, and we'll be able to evaluate those animals for traits like their feed intake and their net feed intake and feed efficiency. So where to for the future of this? We'll continue that same data collection that I showed you for each of the 3 cohorts over the next few years, cohorts 1 to 3. The cohort 1 bulls will have net feed intake EBVs on those bulls, 35 bulls. That'll be available next month or in June. It'll be in the next month's breed plan analysis, the June breed plan analysis, which will be conducted later in May. And that'll be the first time we've had fresh data on net feed intake for quite a while on large numbers of animals. So that'll be pretty exciting to see that. Their daughter fertility data will also go into breed plan as well. That'll be about August or September. Carcass EBVs, as I mentioned, we'll be starting to kill these steers in mid-June, so we'll have the carcass EBVs will be updated using our direct carcass data in October. So it's getting pretty exciting in terms of when that data is coming in. Our cohort 2 bulls, as we get more growth data on their calves as they grow, their 400-day weights and 600-day weights on both the heifer calves in the incorporated herds and the steers, that will also go directly in the breed plan. So back to the graph of where we were. The target when we set this program up was to test 120 bulls over the 3 cohorts, generate about 1,500 steers and 1,500 heifers and evaluate them. And it became pretty clear to us that whilst that's great, we need a lot more data, and this needs to be a continuing program into the future so we can continue to evaluate these sires. So we're in the process of negotiating with Meat and Livestock Australia, and there have been very positive discussions, I'd have to say, about continuing this program, and the Angus Australia board has made the decision to continue to invest in this program into the future if we can continue to get that support from our partners. So we've now revised our expectations, and we're now going to run this program for at least 6 cohorts, over which time we'll collect this sort of data on 250 bulls and have about 3,000 steers and 3,000 heifers with data. Then we'll really be in a position where we can take any DNA marker that's put towards us, and we'll have the data to be able to evaluate, because we'll collect DNA on all these steers and all these animals as well, so that we'll be in a very strong position in the future to be able to utilise this great genomics technology as it's thrown at us. So that's really where we're at with the Sire benchmarking program. As you can probably tell, I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's really one of the best things that Angus Australia has done for a long time. It relies on a lot of partnerships. It relies on support from the members to put bulls into the program, to co-invest with the rest of the members in the society in that, and it relies on our partnerships with our cooperator herds, companies like Bayer Australia, Ranges Valley, universities and the scientists that are involved. So it's a very big collaborative program, but it's a very exciting program as well. So the chairman says that it's time for me to finish talking, and I don't think it's time for questions unless there's one or two.
It's going to ring the bell.
Okay, and I suppose I'll just, there'll obviously be a lot more information on this program coming forward over the next year or two, and will be continual updates on that. Keep an eye on the website. We've had one field day already at Talimba at the research facility, and there'll be another one later this year as well. And so anyone who's passing through that area in the latter part of the year when those steers are in the feedlot, it's just a matter of contacting either myself or Bob Danton. We can most likely arrange a visit for you to visit the steers as well. Okay, so we'll move on. I'll switch back to being the chairman if that's all right. Thank you.